Well, we're in part 3 of this sermon series, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality. I had a person say to me, Jeff, I'll be back in 7 weeks. I don't want to delve into this stuff. And I said, well, I understand this sermon series is going to take us into places that we don't necessarily want to go. And that's part of growing, and that's part of becoming more fully the persons that God created us to be. Maybe you heard about the elderly widow. Did you hear this story? That she had been shopping, she went to her car, she found 4 males in the act of leaving with her car. So she dropped her shopping bags, she drew her handgun, she proceeded to scream with her feeble voice at the top of her lungs, and she said, I have a gun and I know how to use it. Get out of my car. The 4 men didn't wait for a second threat. They got out and ran like mad. The lady, somewhat shaken, then proceeded to load her shopping bags into the back of the car and got into the driver's seat. She was so shaken that she could hardly get the key into the ignition. She kept trying and trying and trying, and then realized why. It was for the same reason she had wondered why there was a football, a frisbee, and some adult beverages in the front seat. A few minutes later, she found her own car parked 4 or 5 spaces down from where she was. She loaded her bags into the car, drove to the police station to report her mistake, and the sergeant to whom she told the story couldn't stop laughing. He pointed to the other end of the counter where 4 pale men were reporting a carjacking by a mad elderly woman described as less than 5 feet tall, glasses, curly white hair, and carrying a large handgun. No charges were filed. This is a true story, by the way. And let me ask you, what's the moral of this story? Anybody? Carry a big gun? I thought the moral of this story is never ever mess with a mad grandma. One of the things that we're going to be looking at today is that you may have Jesus in your heart, but you've got grandma and grandpa and mom and dad in your bones. Are you with me? So we're going to look today at this idea of going back in order to go forward, and this is a counter-cultural idea. Our culture is generally not interested in going back in order to go forward. Our culture is completely focused generally on, I want to make the best of the future, I want to be future-focused, and let me just say there's a time and a place for that. But the degree to which you and I can swing forward is based on the degree to which we are willing to swing back. So we're going to look today at the character of Joseph in the Bible, because he reflects for us what Peso, this major psychologist, said about how God has wired us. God has created us to have 5 basic needs that must be met in order for us to be able to grow, in order for us to realize our potential. What are the 5? They won't surprise you. The need for place, the need for nurture, the need for support, the need for protection, the need for limits. When I was doing my work in psychology, I interviewed these 6th graders about these 5 things. And in creative ways, I was trying to find out the degree to which these are true in their lives, where they have that safe place, where they feel nurtured and supported and protected. Now, you will notice that it doesn't say up there a need for love, does it? Does it? Why is that? Because the need for love is experienced through the setting of limits. So, for example, if a child is in a home where they can run amok and there's not any boundaries, not any limits, they will not feel loved. It doesn't matter how much affection is shown toward them. It doesn't matter how much you kiss them, hug them, and all of that. If I do not in a home say there are boundaries, there are limits, they won't feel loved. And my research on this just proved this point powerfully, which was the reason why my professor wanted me to do this research, is that he said, when you do this, you will discover that these kids are going to long for limits. So I'd ask them, in your home, how often do you hear the word no? Now, these were at-risk kids. All of them said, we never hear that word. And one kid said, he was speaking for all of them when he said, in my home, I want my mom to say no so that I know that she loves me. We're hardwired for these basic needs. And that's why the character of Joseph is such a good one to look at as we think about swinging back in order to swing forward. Look at the iceberg, if you would, with me, please. I have been saying in this sermon series, it's kind of an image for us that our culture, I speak a lot about our culture, and I'm part of that culture, you're part of that culture, we're really, really keen on the 10%, which is what's showing. The 90% under the surface, we're not so much interested in. Give you an example. The other day, this man called me and said, Jeff, you use that image of the iceberg. He said, I work really hard at making sure that that iceberg looks nice and acts nice and is nice. And it's nicely wrapped up. It's all taken care of. And this 90% that you're talking about underneath the surface, I'm not so much interested in that because I don't want to be perceived as not having my life all put together. And let me just say, our culture is really, really curious and obsessed with the 10%. And Jesus is mostly concerned about the 90%. Because underneath the surface is where real life exists. So, look on the screen if you would, please. This is a genogram. For all of the couples who go through premarital counseling at Chapel Hill, they all go through the exercise of completing a genogram. And whenever I am involved in people whose marriages are struggling, I will say to them, I want to send you to person X in order to complete the genogram. The genogram is a family map. It is a family tree, but it focuses on behavior. One of the things that we know, it's a very biblical concept, is that behavioral patterns repeat themselves generation after generation after generation. And I mean that positively and negatively. Now, those of you who have any experience in counseling, either giving it or receiving it, those of you who've had any experience with psychology, studying it or teaching it, you will know that we first start with the negative. If you start with the positive, people have a tendency not to look at the negative. So we start with the negative. And I want you to look at Joseph. He's in the yellow. You see the yellow box? Let me know that you see it, please. Okay. And I got to work hard at keeping you awake today here. So you will see Joseph. And Joseph has a mother named Rachel, and he has a father named Jacob, and he has all kinds of siblings. 11. There's 12 in the family. And you will see that going back to Abraham and Sarah, that there are lies, sibling rivalry, favoritism, and unhealthy marriages. And that goes on generation after generation after generation. So when Joseph experiences the dysfunction of his own family, it's not new. It is a pattern that has been carried on. He's just experiencing it again. Now let me say, for those of you who are going to check out on me, don't check out on me, okay? Because this is deep and this is threatening. There's good news in this. When you and I are willing to swing back into our genogram, we then have the opportunity to break the cycles of negativity so that those cycles don't repeat themselves generation after generation after generation to come. That's the good news. So hang on to that. But let's go back to Joseph. I want you to see that Joseph was considered the favored child. Now, how many of you have ever been the favored child? You don't have to raise your hand. How many of you were not the favorite child? You know it on both sides, right? You know what it's like to see the favored child. You know what it's like not to be the favored child. If you were the favored child, you know what comes with that. Joseph is the favored child. Now, 25% of the whole book of Genesis I'm doing in narrative form. I'm doing very quickly, so I can't show you all the scriptures or we'd be here till midnight. But here's the interesting thing. Joseph is so favored by his father Jacob that he actually gets him a coat. And it is a coat of many colors. And it's a statement. It's a statement. Not only is he my favorite, it is a statement that shows everybody in the world just how favored he is, because he had to spend a lot of money to demonstrate how favored he is. Well, what do his siblings do? His siblings say, Joseph, it's so wonderful that you're the favored child. You will notice on the left side of your screen that there are earthquake events. And these earthquake events, I'm inviting you to do your own genogram, by the way. And in my blog this week, I'll give you a sample so that you can take that little chart and start filling it out. And it doesn't matter how old or how young you are, this can be very beneficial. And one of the things that I'm going to invite you to do, as I do it myself, is to name the earthquake events, because those are significant. They're what we call traumatic. And what is a traumatic event? It is a startling experience in your life that has a lasting effect on your mental state. It shapes you, it forms you, it affects you. I have a good friend who's a pastor who deals with PTSD from the Vietnam War. He was traumatized during the war. He still lives with that to this day. Earthquake events are exactly that. It's not like I got a paper cut and I'm still thinking about the fact that I have a paper cut. No, these are events that have shaped us in deep ways. So, let's look at Joseph and then we'll apply it to our lives, okay? So you have this character named Joseph. And his siblings are mad at him because his father is favoring him to the point that it's embarrassing for Joseph and it's angering for the siblings. So the three events are listed there. What do? They take him to a well. And what do? They put him down deep in the well. Now, in a prison, if you want to really mess with somebody's psyche, what do? You put them in solitary confinement. And solitary confinement is bad, but what's worse? Darkness. You put a person in solitary confinement and minimize the amount of light that they experience, and you will mess with their psyche in ways that nothing else will do. Some say it's worse than waterboarding. Some say it's worse than any other form of torture. So they put him down in this well. They leave him there. We don't know exactly how long. But then they get this other idea. It's number 2 up on your chart. They get this idea that they're going to sell him as a slave to the Egyptians. And by selling him, they're going to generate some income. How much did they generate? Any guesses? The equivalent would be $80,000. And they put him into slavery for 22 years. Now, what I'm wanting us to hear is that this is real trauma. This is real life. Hollywood does not have anything on the Bible. I wish somebody in Hollywood would take the Bible, especially the story of Joseph and put a soap opera to it. And people would say The Bold and Beautiful is all of a sudden weak and not so interesting. Because if you were to take this story and put it in a soap opera, you'd say, wow, you mean to tell me this really existed in somebody's life? The answer is yes. So they sell him into slavery, and what does he lose? He loses his heritage, he loses his culture, he loses his language, he loses his family. And all of a sudden, he's in this foreign territory, and he's a slave. And who does he become a slave to? The president of the country. He becomes Potiphar, who is the Pharaoh, the head, the president. He becomes his slave. Well, Potiphar has a wife. Potiphar's wife thinks that Joseph is rather attractive. And so she makes advances toward him, and he refutes the advances. And then what does she do? Because she's mad and offended, feeling rejected, she accuses Joseph of having raped her. So, third event, he goes to prison. And he's there for, this says 10 years. That's a minimum. Some say as many as 15 years. Are you hearing a picture of a person who's had life at its worst? And what does he do with it all? Well, can any of you imagine marrying Joseph? When I do premarital counseling, along with Roberta, our staff counselor, I always say to them, it makes me so popular with couples. They just rant and rave with excitement. I say, guess what? You're not just marrying the person sitting across from you. You're marrying their whole family system. And they just clap and say, thank you, Jeff, for being such an encourager. And they give me that look like, what? And I say, this is your reality check. Can you imagine being married to Joseph? Do you think that Joseph would be a trusting individual? Do you think that Joseph would have any problems with abandonment or intimacy? Or do you think that he would have this freedom of spirit that would just come up to you and say, oh, enter into my life. I just so want to get to know you. I just so want to love on you. Do you imagine that this is a person who has a wall that is 10 feet wide around him? He doesn't want anybody close to him because the people that were close to him did what to him? They hurt him. And the amazing thing in this story is that Joseph, when he is asked to interpret the dream for the man who put him in prison, because he has a reputation of being a person who can interpret dreams. So Potiphar has this dream. He can't figure it out. He spends several years trying. And he thinks, I think I'll have the person I put in prison interpret my dream. So he sends for Joseph, and Joseph interprets the dream exactly right. Now here's what I want you to hear in this. If I would have been Joseph, and I would have been called before Potiphar, I would have purposefully interpreted it incorrectly. Am I the only one? Why cooperate? And here's a lesson from Joseph. If you're willing to swing back in order to swing forward, Joseph teaches us you do the right thing even when you don't feel like it. Now, we could spend a lot of time on that, but we got to move on. Here's the application. I want to invite you to do the genogram. I've said that. I want to really encourage you to do it, no matter your age and stage in life. And I want you to start noticing the patterns. And here's the thing I want you to notice. Not just the negative patterns, but the positive patterns. For example, some of you are extraordinarily generous. I dare say that if generosity is a part of your family tree now, it was a part of your family tree in the past. And we'll see that pattern of generosity repeated over and over and over again. Some of you know that in my family tree, there's a strong line of alcoholism. By the grace of God, that's not one of my vices. It jumps generations, it switches all over. But in my family tree, you can see it generation after generation after generation. And I talk to our kids about that. And I say to them, you need to be very aware. My mother was extraordinarily generous. When I've done the genogram, I see that her mother was extraordinarily generous. When I do the genogram, I see that her mother was extraordinarily generous. You see how this works? This is an opportunity to swing back in order to swing forward. And when you find those generational patterns like Joseph that are negative, this is your opportunity to break the cycle for life and for many generations to come. When you get into the genogram, these 10 commandments of your family, I hope that you will look at these issues. We're not going to get into them now, because what they do is they provide you an opportunity to say, how were feelings and emotions dealt with in my family of origin? I'll give you a quick example from my own family. In my genogram, when people are stressed, they clam up. So my sister, with whom I have a very good relationship, she was very quiet for about 5 weeks. I would send her a text and I'd get a 1 or 2 word response. Well, because of my genogram, I know that if she were mad at me, she would tell me, but there's something else going on. So I sent her a text and said, will you share with me the reason for your silence? And she said her son just went back into rehab again. And every time that happens, she becomes silent. And we can look at our family tree, our genogram, and see when there's stress, we clam up. You look at that in your own. Attitude toward other cultures, success, all of those things that are up there. They're on the back of your sheet, by the way, so that you have them. It's amazing how much you'll discover. Here's the other thing. I got to say this quickly. Discern the good God intends in, through, and in spite of your family and past. The most significant verse in the whole book of Genesis is when the brothers come to Joseph and say, we're so sorry for all that we've done to you. And his response, he had the power to take them out. He had the power to punish them. He had the power to make life as miserable for them as it was for him. And he had one response. What you intended for harm, God used for good. And what's that about? Here's another lesson we learn from Joseph. Joseph always named and never blamed. See, the danger in doing the genogram is that you get all kinds of blame. Well, I'm this way because of my mother. I'm this way because of my father. You can name without blame. Blame does not help, but naming heals. And that's what Joseph did. He never blamed, but he was very careful to name. It's an important lesson for us. What people can intend for harm or evil, God can use for good. Now, if I had the chart back up here, I don't want to swing back. There it is. Thank you, Doug. You will see that Joseph and his wife had their first child, and what did they name the first child? Manasseh. And in the Hebrew tradition, every name means something really important. And what does Manasseh mean? I hope to forget. Now, he didn't forget by denying. He was able to forget by naming. Let's go to the third thing here. Doug, do you mind going to that, please? Is that if you and I are willing to grow, and if you and I are willing to heal, it's hard work. It'll require a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, and it's messy. It's not easy. It's messy. As I close, how many of you have heard of Roger Bannister? What did Roger Bannister do? 4-minute mile. In 1954. It was considered the greatest athletic achievement in the 20th century. Why? Because it was said that breaking the 4-minute mile couldn't be done. And you know what Roger Bannister said about it? And I quote, "My legs seemed to meet no resistance at all. I was propelled by some unknown force." When Joseph says, what people intended for harm or for evil, God used for good, it is a demonstration of how God is active in our lives, how God's Spirit is always working for good, no matter how deep the pain. And just like Roger Bannister, when you and I are willing to do our part, God is willing to do things that amazes. So I love this expression. You may have heard it before. You work as though it depends on you, and you pray as though it depends on God. And when you and I are willing to go back and do the hard work and trust God because God is trustworthy, you will be absolutely amazed at the healing that can come through your life. So I often hear people say, "Jeff, I just want God to pass the magic wand." I always say God can. God most likely won't. Why? We've got to do our part. We got to show up. And when you take our willingness to show up and God's activity called the Holy Spirit, God's grace, God's power, and you put them together, you have a life that's been healed. And you have cycles that have been broken. And you have generations to come which will be blessed. And that's the story of Joseph. And that can be our story too. Amen? Your neighbor in a way that is comfortable for you, because it is a reminder that this journey that we're on is to be shared. And the beautiful mess is a part of the journey. And God's grace is more powerful than the drama of our lives. And God's love is deeper than any hurts that we've ever experienced. And so, sisters and brothers in Christ, as we go forth, may the blessing of Almighty God, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit go before us and prepare the way, be upon us to remind us there is a power greater than ourselves, and be beneath us to support us when we feel like giving up. And may that same blessing go behind us and clean up our messes and bring good out of all things that were not so good. So go now in peace. And may the love of God surround us everywhere we may go. Amen and amen. Let's sing our closing song.
the wind at your back and the sun on your face, with the song in your heart and the promise of grace going